Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jim Byron. I'm the president and CEO of the Richard Nixon Foundation, and I want to welcome you to the Nixon Library and to the Nixon National Energy Conference. But before you take your seats, I want to invite you to stand for the presentation of the colors and our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. You may be seated. We've covered a lot of ground today at this energy conference and last evening, beginning with the historical basis of President Nixon's energy policies and exploring today the future of American energy. I'd like to acknowledge a few special guests and start by welcoming back to the Nixon Library the former First Lady of Indiana and Second Lady of the United States, Karen Pence. Thank you for being here. Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison, former ambassador to NATO and the senator representing the great state of Texas. Where's Ambassador Hutchison? She's here somewhere. Thank you for being here, Madam Ambassador. Dan Brulette, former Secretary of Energy. Thank you. Kimberly Reed, former Chairman and President of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Thank you for being here. Victoria Coates, former Deputy National Security Advisor. Thank you for being here. Two members of a Nixon Foundation Board of Directors, Charlie Zhang, the Treasurer, and Sandy Quinn, former Foundation President. Thank you for your support. I'd like to welcome Ambassador Gadi Vasquez, former ambassador to the UN World Food Program in Rome, and Janice Lim, a member of the Yorba Linda City Council. Thank you for being here, Councilwoman. I'd also like to acknowledge Sarah Faye Snyder of the William E. Simon Foundation. Where is Sarah? There she is. And I'd like to acknowledge the support of the William E. Simon Foundation. William Simon Sr. served as President Nixon's Secretary of the Treasury and the founding chairman of the Richard Nixon Library and Birthplace. But he was also the energy czar during the Nixon administration, tasked with devising and implementing a series of really revolutionary energy policies. There is perhaps no more important issue today than American energy security. It is maybe the defining domestic issue of our time. Everybody has to power their homes and drive their cars and cook their meals, but a lot of questions are now being raised about the effects of America's energy consumption on the environment and on national security. So the question before us today is how to harness American energy and link it to issues around the world to project American strength abroad and American livelihood at home. Yesterday marked 50 years since President Nixon outlined in a message to Congress what amounted to America's first national energy policy. Energy was a new subject, a new issue in the early 1970s that Americans had not had to tackle before. But a series of foreign crises and a serious trade imbalance had President Nixon warning of trouble to come and trying to get ahead of it. He submitted several energy policy proposals to Congress that largely fell on deaf ears. These included research and development for clean energy, to make energy resources available on federal lands, to begin expanding the nuclear fuel supply, to reorganize the government, to create a single energy agency, boosting the coal industry, and ending controls on oil imports. Some of these occurred, like the Alaska pipeline and shrewd strategic management led by Secretary Simon through the oil crisis in late 1973, but many of these policies were ahead of their time and may still be so today. A leader in today's debate, a strong advocate for robust American energy security and using that security to project American strength around the world is Vice President Mike Pence. The former Vice President served as a congressman representing the great state of Indiana for 6 terms, chaired the House Republican Conference before his election as the 50th governor of Indiana in 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a high privilege and an honor to introduce to you the 48th Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Mike Pence.
Thank you, Jeff. Great time, 50 years ago. 50 years ago. That's great. Well, thank you, Jim Byron. Thank you. It's an honor to be here at the Nixon Library, and 50 years on, to be joined by so many noteworthy Americans to speak about American energy at the Nixon Foundation's National Energy Conference. Would you all join me in thanking the Nixon Library for bringing together this vitally important forum in such a timely way. We are delighted to be here. I feel like I've been in this room before. But seeing so many friends, seeing so many people I've had the privilege to serve with is a particular joy to me. I want to thank a few people who made such a difference in the course of our administration. I know that Gadi Vasquez made an incredible contribution in another role early in his career in helping to build this great national treasure that is the Nixon Library. Ambassador Vasquez, thank you for all of your career, and thank you for your role in the history of this place. I also know that you just heard from him in the program, but I'll have more to say about him later. But former Energy Secretary Dan Brouillette, one of the great champions of American energy in the world today. Thank you, Dan. I also want to thank a member of the National Security Council team at the White House, a principled conservative. She's made an incredible difference in 4 consequential years of the Trump-Pence administration. Victoria Coates, thank you for your incredible service to America, and thank you for being with us today. And finally, I must tell you, when I first met her, she was a standout leader in the United States Senate. Senior senator from Texas, was a national figure, and I mean to tell you that there was no one better as our ambassador at NATO at a time that we saw our allies in Europe step up as never before. And let me just say again, to NATO ambassador and my friend Kay Bailey Hutchinson, thank you for your incredible service in the Trump-Pence administration and throughout your career to America. An honor to be with you. And as you all know here, and it's always customary to introduce the highest ranking official last, so allow me to introduce again my wife of 37 years, the best second lady the United States of America has ever had. Karen Pence is with us today. Thank you all for that. You know, the energy industry has always had a special place in my heart. Like the namesake of this great library, whose father Frank was a gas station owner. I grew up in a gas station family in southern Indiana. After my dad served in combat in the Korean War, he came home. He followed work down to a small town where I and my 3 brothers and 2 sisters showed up. Dad would eventually manage a string of gasoline stations across the heartland of America, but he put us all to work early on, and I spent a lot of time on the drive at Ray's Marathon in Columbus, Indiana, with the name Mike just above the pocket of my shirt, hustling out. I was what was called a gas station attendant, which for the younger people in the room will explain to you later exactly what that was. But I have to tell you that seeing the tanker trucks bearing that Marathon logo, the home fuel oil being delivered, early mornings, late nights, working at the gas station with a backdrop of my youth. And so I've always felt a great connection, a personal connection to American energy. And that's why it was a special privilege for me to be vice president in the most pro-energy administration in American history. You know, in 2017, just months after taking office, our administration boldly declared that we would usher in a new era of American energy. And unlike the impasse that President Nixon faced 50 years ago when he outlined his first ever vision for American energy, we accomplished great things in those 48 months. And in those 4 years, we made America the world's greatest energy superpower, and that energy renaissance fueled American strength at home and abroad. You know, the truth is, for decades, America had lived at the mercy of foreign energy suppliers. Experts warned that our domestic resources were scarce, the world was rapidly running out of oil, and that the only way to solve the problem, with the same message we hear from the American left today, was through draconian restrictions on production and use of American energy. But under the Trump-Pence administration, we saw things differently. We recognized the truth that America has virtually a limitless supply of energy right under our feet. We recognize that those resources belong not to government, but to the American people. We knew that if we unleashed American energy, we would create millions of good-paying jobs, reclaim America's sovereignty over our God-given resources, reclaim our economic strength from foreign suppliers, and strengthen our position as leader of the free world. And that's exactly what we did. Under our administration, we ended the war on American energy. We declared our energy independence, and with the support of many of the team members that are in this room, we achieved energy independence for the first time in 70 years. Now, the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. What is now has been before. And the truth is, we didn't invent the energy playbook that we put into practice during our season of service. It actually, in fact, looked an awful lot like the Nixon playbook that was ignored by the Congress of his time 50 years ago. Then, as now, the energy crisis that faced President Nixon was government-induced. Then, as now, federal energy leases and unleashing American energy was the priority for an administration. One of our first actions when we came into office was to withdraw the United States from the unfair, one-sided Paris Climate Agreement, which punished American industry while allowing nations like China to continue polluting with impunity. We canceled the previous administration's Clean Power Plan. We replaced it with a pro-free market, affordable clean energy rule. We approved the Keystone and Dakota pipelines. We expedited approval of the Burgos pipeline, and we opened up the Alaskan National Wildlife Region to responsible oil and gas leasing. It was an extraordinary record of success. And I want to give credit where credit is due. I mentioned him, but I think I saw him slip back into the room every step of the way, first as the Deputy Secretary of Energy, and then as the Secretary of Energy. All that we did was driven by the extraordinary and relentless professionalism of Secretary Dan Brouillette. And Dan, I want to thank you one more time for your incredible contribution to the country. You know, within months of unleashing American energy, Secretary Brouillette remembers our economy took off like a jackrabbit, as we say in Indiana. The U.S. became the #1 producer of oil and natural gas in the world. It's truly incredible. For the first time in 3/4 of a century, we became a net exporter of natural gas. And net energy imports fell to the lowest level in 60 years. And with a powerful energy sector in America, we fueled economic growth, 7 million good-paying jobs. Unemployment plummeted to a 50-year low. We moved 10 million people from welfare to work. It was the largest poverty reduction in American history. That's what happens when you unleash American energy. America prospers. But as we gather here at the Nixon Library, think of an administration so associated with a strong American foreign policy. You all know that energy is much more than a domestic issue. It's a foreign policy issue as well, because a vibrant energy sector powers American strength and independence on the world stage. With that renewed economic strength during our administration, we were able to not only rebuild our economy, but we rebuilt our military after years of reckless budget cuts. And as the proud father of a United States Marine captain, the father-in-law of a Navy captain, I couldn't be more proud that our administration was finally giving our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard the support they deserve to defend our nation. But it wasn't just American investments in our national defense. It was our allies' investments in our common defense. And in 3 short years before the worst pandemic in 100 years struck, we managed to secure $400 billion in increased investments in our common defense by our NATO allies, and none of that would have been possible without the tenacious and relentless and demanding leadership of our ambassador to NATO, Kay Bailey Hutchison. Thank you again, Madam Ambassador. It's true. It's true. On that foundation of economic growth and energy independence, we projected American strength in the world. We unleashed our American military in the Middle East, and we crushed the ISIS caliphate and took out the most dangerous terrorists in the world. We recognized Israel's capital of Jerusalem and their sovereignty over the Golan Heights. We withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, and in 4 short years, with that renewed American strength and independence, we achieved the first new peace deal in the Arab world in 25 years in the Abraham Accords. We made history. And so much of it was powered by American energy, the ability of America to steer our own course and lead the free world from the standpoint of energy independence. But how the world has changed. Now, more than 2 years ago, the war on energy is back with a vengeance under the Biden administration. And it should come as no surprise that America today is weaker on the world stage than ever before. Joe Biden actually pledged to, quote, end fossil fuels during his campaign, and he's been making good on that promise ever since. His allies in the Congress, like the new Democrat leader, who said just this week that efforts to unleash American energy were, quote, partisan. And in his words, an example of, quote, putting polluters over people. With the support of that Democrat majority, President Joe Biden canceled the Keystone and XL pipelines. He imposed drilling moratoriums, refused to auction oil and gas leases on federal lands. And now he wants to weaponize the SEC to choke out financing for traditional energy sources through a capricious ESG regulations. In fact, President Biden used his very first veto as President of the United States, refusing to protect hardworking Americans from woke ideology in corporate boardrooms. He's even trying to force 2/3 of all gasoline vehicles off the road with draconian new standards. And you here in California don't need to hear from me about unrealistic demands to drive gasoline-powered vehicles off the roads and replace them with electric vehicles. It's all being done to appease a radical left in America, but make no mistake about it, will also only increase our dependence on China, which is the dominant battery maker in the world. Under their policies, American consumers will lose, and China will win. In just 2 years, President Biden has turned a surplus of American oil and gas into a deficit in the name of environmental extremism, and all at the expense of American workers. And I mean to tell you, ever since Karen and I moved back to Indiana, back among our family and friends, I can tell you firsthand what you already know, and that is the American people are hurting. I hear it everywhere I go. I was at a gas station in Hobart, Indiana not long ago, and I saw a young mother with 2 little ones in the back seat. She and I struck up a conversation. And I said, "How you holding up with the gas prices being the way they are?" And she said, "Oh, we're doing okay." She said, I only have to go to the food bank once a week now. I said, is your family out of work? She said, no, my husband's got a good job. I work part-time, but she says, with gasoline prices going up, with inflation being what it is, she says, you know, to continue to pay for gas and pay for the cost of living and rent and everything, it's got to come out of the food budget. But then she told me those people at the food pantry are awful nice. I mean, we know that 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck right now in the failed policies of this administration. But that woman in Hobart, Indiana, that image of those 2 little kids in the back seat, a working family, just breaks my heart. Because the truth is, prices have been skyrocketing as a result of the policies of this administration. And the Biden administration has been taking increasingly desperate measures to try and turn things around that are actually only harming the American economy further. He depleted half of our strategic petroleum reserve, which exists for national emergencies. And instead of unleashing domestic producers, he went hat in hand to OPEC, asked them to increase production. And as evidence of America's waning influence on the world stage, OPEC turned him down. Now we see Middle Eastern countries drawing closer to China and Russia by the day. The truth is, President Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad. His war on energy has sapped American strength and influence in the world. And the time has come for America to return to the policies that will drive American growth and American strength. And it begins with American energy. You know, when you lose the momentum in the economy that comes in the wake of this war on energy and the gusher of spending in Washington, D.C., I don't have to tell all the thought leaders that are gathered here their real cost to the very security of our nation. You know, today, as As China's floating a new battleship about every month in the Asia-Pacific, Russia's waging an unconscionable war of aggression in Ukraine, North Korea is firing missiles again, and Iran is enriching uranium, President Joe Biden actually wants to cut military spending in the United States. His recent budget, after inflation, called for a 1% reduction in military spending. Today, military spending is at 3% of our GDP. That's less than half what it was under President Reagan. Less than 13% of our federal budget is spent on national defense. That's the lowest since World War II. Facing perhaps the most capable and deadly adversaries in modern history, yet our defense spending is on par with the isolationist 1930s. And the Democrats want it to be less. Now let me be clear. As we look at the war raging in Eastern Europe, Vladimir Putin is responsible for the unprovoked invasion in Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin and Russia need to be held to account. That said, I have no doubt in my mind that that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan emboldened Russia to take the action that it took. President Biden has replaced American strength with weakness, and he's made the world a more dangerous place as a result. And so now more than ever, we need to renew American strength, to recognize that America is the leader of the free world. We're the arsenal of democracy. If America isn't leading the free world is not being led. The war in Ukraine is not our war, but freedom is our fight. And I believe we must continue to give the Ukrainian military the means to repel the Russian invasion and reclaim their sovereignty. It is in the interest of freedom, theirs and ours. We must make it clear that we will not tolerate naked aggression and attempts to redraw national boundaries by force anywhere in the world, whether it's in Europe, on the Korean Peninsula, or in the Taiwan Straits. And make no mistake about it, the fate of Ukraine will reach far beyond the European continent. I guarantee you that Communist China is watching. I believe history teaches that weakness arouses evil. And weakness in Europe today may very well arouse an even greater evil in the Asia-Pacific. Because the truth is, in this museum that celebrates the history-making opening of U.S. and China relations, born in the hope that China would embrace greater liberties, the more we had economic exchange. The reality is our administration was able to carry to the world to create a national consensus. In recent decades, China's only grown bolder in repressing their people, trampling on religious liberty, human rights, committing trade abuses, intellectual property theft, threatening Taiwan, and engaging in aggressive military actions that threaten the very freedom of navigation in the Asia-Pacific. I mean, this week alone, we learned that 2 Chinese nationals were arrested for running an illegal police station in New York City, which existed to harass dissidents who had fled China to come to the land of the free and the home of the brave. China may not yet be an evil empire, but under President Xi, it certainly aspires to become one. President Xi's vision for the world is one in which freedom is constrained, but Beijing's power is not. And I would submit to each of you that the only antidote is American strength. Now, John Quincy Adams reminded us that America must never, quote, go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. But we must be prepared for the great power competition that the Chinese Communist Party poses. And a resurgent Russia. We must have a military fit to the task. We must have an economy that can sustain the 21st challenges of our national defense. But to do all this, and it's what makes this gathering so important, We need a strong energy sector in America, harnessing the God-given resources of this nation and unleashing them to our people to drive American prosperity. And with this, I close. You know, from the very founding of our country, I believe the leaders of this nation have understood that the source of our national greatness is our faith in God, our freedom, and our vast natural resources. You can see it in the literature of leaders throughout generations. But no American leaders ever scarcely talked about this nation in our first 200 years that didn't reflect on all three. On that foundation of faith in the American people, on our heritage of freedom, and on the boundless resources of this nation. In fact, in the Congress of the United States, where I served for 12 years, there's a few words written on the wall of the inside chamber. On the ceiling are the words, e pluribus unum, out of one, many, or out of many, one. Just above the American flag are the words, in God we trust. But farther above that, little noticed on most of the tours, in the House of Representatives is a plaque with a quote bearing the words of Daniel Webster, that great American statesman. It describes what he called America's noble pursuit. He was giving a speech commemorating the brave lives of patriots who secured our country's liberty in the American Revolution. And he said words that are now enshrined in the People's House. Daniel Webster said, "Let us develop the resources of our land, call forth its power, build up its institutions, promote all its great interests, and see whether we also in our day and generation may not perform something worthy to be remembered." Think about that. One of the great statesmen in the history of this country began his description of America's noble purpose by challenging his countrymen to develop the resources of our land and call forth its power. You are gathered here today at the Nixon Library National Energy Conference because you understand that developing the resources of our land is how we call forth its power. It's true today, and it's always been central to the American story. And I'm very confident that with your insights, with the leadership represented here today, the American people will once again return to our noble pursuit. We will develop the resources of our land. We will call forth its power. We will build up our institutions and promote our great interests. And I know that someday, and someday soon, we will unleash American energy. We will return American prosperity, and the best days for the greatest nation on earth are yet to come. So help us God. Thank you very much. Honor to be with you all. Thank you to the Nixon Library, and God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the Nixon National Energy Conference. Thank you for being here. I know some of you had a chance to eat. Some of you were listening intently to all of you were listening intently to the Vice President. And for those who did not have a chance to eat, we invite you now to enjoy your meals, and thank you for being with us today.